Good day. My name is Professor Dana Robert, and it's my great privilege to welcome you to this workshop hosted by the Boston University Center for Global Christianity and Mission, of which I'm director. The subject of our conference is Mapping Christianity in China from 1550 to 1950. We have with us this weekend nearly 300 researchers and outstanding scholars from 25 different countries. The development of relational and geospatial tools for the study of Christianity in China is an exciting idea whose time has come, and I'm delighted to open our proceedings. Before we begin, I wish to thank our co-sponsors. Thanks go to Professor Thomas Berger, Director of the Boston University Center for the Study of Asia. We thank Professor Timothy Longman, Director of the Boston University Institute on Culture, Religion, and World Affairs. Both of these have provided funding to make this webinar possible. Sincere thanks also go to Dean Mary Elizabeth Moore of the Boston University School of Theology, which hosts the Center for Global Christianity and Mission. My chief task now is to introduce Dr. Daryl R. Ireland, who is one of the key visionaries behind this project and will chair the conference. Dr. Ireland is Associate Director of the Center for Global Christianity and Mission and a research professor in the School of Theology at Boston University. Author of John Sung, Modern Chinese Christianity and the Making of a New Man, published by Baylor University Press, Dr. Ireland is also the innovator behind the China Christian Posters Project. And I'm honored to call him my colleague and friend. So without further ado, I turn the proceedings over to Dr. Ireland, and I trust all of us will have a very productive few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Robert. Your visionary leadership has made the Center for Global Christianity and Mission a hub of innovation and a trailblazer in digital humanities. Eugenio Minagon, Alex Mayfield, the 10 graduate and undergraduate students, and I, who are all working on this project at the center, are indebted to you. Thank you. Thank all of you who have gathered today. At a moment when it seems impossible that anyone would volunteer to spend more time on Zoom, about 300 of you from, as you heard, almost 25, or at least 25 countries, chose to squeeze this into your schedule, often at quite inconvenient times. Your commitment suggests a level of enthusiasm about this project that is renewing our own belief in and desire for a digital tool that can be transformative for scholarship that works at the intersection of Christianity and modern China. A project of this size, of course, takes a team, and it's been a joy to collaborate with Professor Liu Xin and her colleagues and students at Renmin University. Professor Liu, would you please say a few words?
Yes. Good morning, distinguished scholars. When I heard CHCD, my first impression is that it is an important event in the field of history of Christianity in China. Many pioneers and respectful scholars have devoted quite a lot on the databases of the field. Based on our common research interest in Qing history, Christian studies, and digital humanities, the Institute of Qing History at Renmin University of China is very glad to join Boston University in building the CHCD. Our institute has already established a digital Qing history lab on the creation of a new Qing history data sharing platform. Professor Hu Heng, the vice director of our institute, is the founder and director of the lab. He's also here. Thanks for his support for CHCD. We have social survey database in Qing history and Republican period, natural disaster information integrated databases, and so on. We are now funding build a Ching historical geographic information system on the basis of the printed atlas of Qing history. As a Chinese scholar in history of Christianity, I personally feel the responsibility to take part in the CHCD project and make contributions. But it is so limited that any one of us and institutions could do. So thank you so much for being with us. You came via internet from Europe, in Oceania, North America, East Asia, all over the world today to share your experience, wisdom, comment, suggestions, or any valuable ideas. We really appreciate that, and thanks again for your coming. Wish the success of our workshop and success of CHCD project. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Liu. Teamwork really does make all the difference. Now, let me take a few moments to remind you why we've gathered today. The China Historical Christian Database is exiting its proof of concept phase. We are convinced that by mapping where every Christian church, school, hospital, convent, publishing house, and the like were located in China between 1550 and 1950, we can see new things about Christianity and its place in modern China. For example, the database will help us understand the spread of literacy among ordinary girls as we locate when and where Christian elementary schools for girls appeared in China. Second, by recreating who worked inside these buildings, we can generate some fascinating social network maps. And they can reveal, for instance, who were the Chinese scholars that inspired and collaborated with James Legge in producing the first complete English translation of the Confucian classics. The possibilities of what can be done with this database are rich and enticing. And with a website built to interact with the data, we believe this tool can assist scholars and students. It can be used in classrooms and even enjoyed by a curious public who might be interested in such things as how many churches were in Beijing, or finding out where a great-grandmother was stationed as a missionary. I mean, this tool has genealogical purposes too. But we need to remember that at this point, we can almost do none of that. We have only performed a proof of concept. To move forward, we really need to listen to others. So there are three questions that are circling for us today and for the days to come. I want us to be listening to what have others learned? And then third, what do other people like you want from the China Historical Christian Database? How can it be transformative as a tool for your own work? Those are the critical questions that I think are before us. This database is poised to move forward, but we hope this workshop will sharpen its focus, open new possibilities, and build momentum. And for all of that, we need your input. So thank you for being here. Before we break off to explore what others have done and learned, let me explain a few logistical things. For those who want to be part of session 1 on spatial and biographical databases on Chinese and global history with Peter Boll, Ruth Mostern, and Hung Hu, please stay online. This space that you're in will momentarily host that first session. For those of you who want to be part of session 2 on bibliographic and textual databases in the field of Christianity and China, featuring Nicholas Standard, Qinghe Xiao, and Mark Meir, you will need to exit this Zoom meeting and then click the link for session 2 in your Zoom guide or the Zoom cheat sheet that you received by email. In 90 minutes, we will gather again in this common room for a final discussion. So if you are in session 2, that will require that you, again, exit your Zoom meeting and then click the link to rejoin this common room where we will end our time together today. Now, may you go with energy and curiosity as you learn what lessons can be drawn from pioneering digital projects in the fields of Chinese history and Chinese Christianity. You have 3 minutes until the parallel sessions begin. If you're going to session 2, please go now. For those planning to stay for session 1, I am going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Alex Mayfield, who will open this panel shortly. Thank you.
Alex. Welcome. Thank you. Welcome everybody to Parallel Session 1. I'm Alex Mayfield. I'm one of the lead investigators for the China Historical Christian Database. And today we have some amazing panelists who will be talking about their own groundbreaking research. So we are all in for a real big treat. Now, just a reminder on the format, our panelists will each have 20 minutes to share, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for question and answer after each presentation. So if there's any time left after we're done, then we'll open up the floor for a kind of round robin style question and answer session. And to keep things orderly, I will be moderating questions. So if there's a question or a comment while the speaker is presenting that you'd like to ask, all you have to do is go to the bottom of your screen, somewhere around here, and there's a Q&A button that you can click, and it'll send me your question, and I'll do my best to make sure that it gets asked. Panelists, just so you know, I'll be sending you time reminders as your time winds down to help you keep track of time. We're trying to run a very tight ship today because we have so many great voices to hear from. So just so you know, I'll be letting you know about your time. And last, before I introduce our first speaker, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Darrell Island just said, that the purpose of our conference, our main goal is to help position the China Historical Christian Database to succeed as a project. So as you listen to these wonderful presenters, try to keep questions in mind like what can we learn from what's being shared, and then how can the experience of these projects translate into the success of future ones. So for the sake of time, I can only give a brief introduction for each of our esteemed panelists, but I will be placing a link to their full bios in the chat. So make sure to check out that maybe after they're speaking. Now, our first panelist is Peter Bohl. Professor Bohl is the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning at Harvard University's Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies. Today, he'll be sharing about his experience working on the China Historical GIS and the China Biographical Database. Welcome, Professor Bohl. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You're right, I teach history at Harvard, Chinese history, but I'm no longer a vice provost. Luckily, having avoided that bullet at the right moment, I'm going to share my screen now so that I can go immediately to the project. I assume now you all can see this. I'm going to be talking about the goals of CHGIS, the China Historical Geographic Information System, and CBDB, the China Biographical Database. I want to alert you all to the most recent issue of the Journal of Chinese History, which is devoted to digital humanities and the study of Chinese history. It includes both a theoretical article by Michael Fuller and a series of historical studies using large data sets very often and digital humanities analytic techniques from the Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Ching, and even into the present. It includes as well a series of introductions to some of the most important and innovative digital humanities projects for the study of China, from things like ctext.org, the largest of all databases, Ming, Ching, Women Writers, the China Biographical Database, and various other things as well, Marcus. And some of the people who've been involved in these things are also participants in this conference. Now, the China Historical GIS and CBDB share certain kinds of goals. They aim to serve scholars. They were not developed to answer one research question. They were developed in order to provide common standards and a foundation that would serve many, many interests. CHGIS, which was developed by Harvard and Fudan University, the Center for Geographic Analysis, 中国历史地理研究中心, aimed to create a common GIS for Chinese history that would allow scholars to accurately map historical data. And it includes data sets running from 221 to 19 BC to 1911 AD. The China Biographical Database currently has 470,000 people in it. And its goal is to enable scholars to study historical topics through the study of individuals and of groups. Now, it's important to keep in mind that we have to serve users across the world. This is the users for the historical GIS, and the CBDB looks quite similar. And that means we have to make sure that our language is clear, but also we try to make sure that we keep our database trilingual, that is Chinese, Pinyin, Romanization, and English. The historical GIS makes its data sets freely available to everyone in the world for download. You go to the China Historical GIS website, you can find out more about it, and you will find links both to the gazetteers, but also to the data sets themselves, which are stored permanently on Dataverse, which can be downloaded. We finished version 6. I'm not sure if there will ever be a version 7, but version 6 basically is as complete as the historical geographers could make it, down to the county or the Xian level, although there are also tens of thousands, around 70,000 village locations for the late Qing dynasty. You can find this, as I said, on Dataverse, where you can choose not only among these, but also from a series of other data sets as well. The late G. William Skinner's data sets on Buddhism, on temples, and so on. So this is really a repository that allows for many, many different kinds of usage. Let me turn now to the China Biographical Database, the 中国历代人物传记资料库. As I said, it has around 470,000 individuals in it. It's a joint project of Beijing University, the 中国古代史研究中心, the Institute for History and Philology at Academia Sinica, and the Fairbanks Center at Harvard University. This gives you some idea of the number of people that are in the database. You'll see that our strength lies in Tang and An. The numbers are there's not an equal distribution. You may look at this and say, how is it possible that Ming, with 210,000 people, has so many? And the answer to that turns out to be very simple. We have around 30,000 Ming Dynasty civil examination degree holders, the Jinshi degree holders, and the records for these degrees, the granting of degrees, have been published, and it includes both the parentage, mother and father, but also father's father and father's father's father of all the 6 degree holders, but also lists their older and younger brothers, which sometimes means cousins as well. And that's why there's so many. We're currently in the process of adding many more. We have about 1 million people in the pipeline. The information in CBDB is put together and sorted into different ways. And you see here different kinds. The first, beginning on the left, we see the total number of people. We see then their addresses, where somebody was born, buried, died. Not necessarily the same thing as where they served in government, but these are biographical addresses. They're alternate names. As you know, in China, people have courtesy names and studio names and so on. The offices they held, how they entered their office, whether it is, for example, by passing an examination, being appointed, being ordained, however it is that they entered into their career. Then large numbers of kinship relations, social relationships, friend, student, teacher, somebody you write a letter to, a poem to, and so on. The number of the writings, extant and non-extant of the person, and then something called social distinctiveness, 社会区分, which is how people were thought of. So if somebody was known to be an official, but also a painter, we would include the fact that they were known as a painter, or as a monk, or as a priest, or as a famous layman, and so on. CBDB is a relational database, and it's important to make the distinction. Many people think of a shujuku, a database or a ziliaoku, as an Excel spreadsheet. And in CBDB, it's much more complicated because the different tables are related to each other, and everybody is coded, and all the positions they can have are coded. What this means is that I could take a person and I could say, okay, who are the other people with whom that person is associated? But then I might also ask, who are the people that share that same kind of association? Or a person serves in government in a place, and because it's a relational database, I could say, who else serves in that place? Or who else had that office at that time or at another time? To help users, we've designed various queries. These queries are very often complex. That is, behind them lie multiple sets of queries. Everything from how different ways in which people enter government. So this is where I would go if I wanted to find out all the people who passed the civil service examination during a certain time period. I could go here. But I could also use this to find out who entered by hereditary privilege, by appointment, and so on. I could query kinships. I could say, for example, let us look at one person and find out all their relatives to the 3rd degree. Or I could say, show me 11 generations of descendants. Kinship is variable. It depends upon the parameters you set in terms of ancestry, descendants, marriage, and collateral kin. Associations allows you to, for example, choose a place and then go to find who in that place was a member of a certain kind of association. This is a very good way of finding, for example, teacher-student relationships or friend-friend relationships in a particular place. Social networks. Here I might go and choose one person or many people and ask who they were connected to and how those people were connected to each other. A pairwise association. A pairwise association basically says, oh, if I have two people, right? I have two names. Is there any connection between them? Are there direct connections? Are there directions through one person or through two other people, and so on? And I can query place associations. I could go to a place and choose all the different kinds of associations I would like to see in that place. I can query by status, tell me all the painters, and so on. And of course, errors, but let us not talk too much about errors. This is an example of a query table. This is look at entry. And in this case, if you beginning at the top, you'll see that I selected a certain kind of entry, that is the Jinshi, Zhengzhou Ming Jinshi. I set dates, right? From year 1368 to 1644. I didn't select a place, but I could have basically said, I only want to know about people from a certain place, either a province, a prefecture, or a county. And then here I run the query. And you'll see that I got 27,905 people. The query took, I would say, around 6 seconds. And then I can store those people, the IDs for those people, and do further kinds of queries on them. Or I could save it to GIS to do a map. What can you do with the information that we have? Well, CBDB wants to support different kinds of analysis. One is a straightforward statistical analysis. You know, we often hear that people in the pre-modern world live to 35, which is based on a misunderstanding of the average age of the population when you factor in infant mortality. If you take infant mortality out of the picture, you see that the age distribution for people in the past basically had a median age of around 63. And this is the life curve, or the life expectancy curve for such people. However, when you analyze it further to look at the distribution of women's age at death, this is what you find. You find the double hump because of the death of women in childbirth. You can see that hump right there during the child giving years. Another kind of analysis is social network analysis. In this case, I chose 72 people from the Middle Ming period, basically people who were active between 1460 and let's say around 1520, and said, okay, who are these people and are they connected to each other? And you can see that among intellectuals, there's a considerable amount of connection. But then I ask, tell me about the other people they had connections to. And here, so I found the people. I did a query in CBDB saying, show me the social associations of these people. Right? And then I exported that information to a graph using GEFI, and sorted that out into various subgroups and clusters. I can measure the degree of centrality using GEFI, different kinds of centrality, or what's called the Zhongxindu. And when I do that and redraw the graphs to highlight centrality, I see that people like Lu Nan and Zhang Ruoshui, Li Dongyang actually are more central at the time than somebody like Wang Shouren, Wang Yanming. But I can break that graph down and make it more abstracted. Here, looking only at people who have at least 7 connections in the graph. I can also put this on a map. And in this case, I've located those 72 mid-Ming intellectuals on a map. Now, but when I do this and go to the next map, I can say, well, where are all their associates? And there they're distributed over the map. However, in a GIS, I can do something else. I can say, with CBDB query allows me to say how many people are at each place. And when I do that, I discover that in fact, although people are distributed across the map, the concentrations of people, of intellectuals in the mid-Ming are in the Suzhou area, northern and middle Zhejiang province, Jiangxi, the Fujian coast, and some in Guangdong. The final thing I want to say is that, well, let me go back and say two things first. One is CBDB and CHGIS both have APIs, that is application programming interfaces. Anyone who has an online system can make a connection, or even if off their own computer, make a connection to CHGIS and CBDB and access data so that it shows up on their own screen without having to go to CBDB. Basically, you're sending a query to CBDB and getting data back. That means that we can link our databases together. And I expect that in the future, CBDB and the Christian database biographical database will be linked so that we can use each other's data. The second thing I want to say is that within China itself, we have decided that the best way to distribute this was to commercialize it. And so we've turned to a company called ChineseAll.com, 中文在线. And they have created a new interface called the Yinda system, which you can find there. The advanced version will be released in coming days or coming weeks, more likely. And this will have all CBDB data in it, but it will provide online graphing, online mapping, and it will provide links to digital texts that are in the 中文在线 textual database as well. So we've had, you can go to the CBDB and CHGIS websites. You can download all our data for free. You can see how we've done it. And for anyone interested in building a database, I want to recommend the CBDB User's Guide, right? Created by Michael Fuller, who's the architect of the CBDB database, which really explains how a relational database works and the intricacies of building queries and how to use them to your advantage. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Boll. That was really, as someone who does is kind of more on the technical side of our current project, that was really wonderful information, and they're great resources to everyone who's attending and watching now. So please, if you haven't already, go spend some time looking at the document he just mentioned, messing around on the website, just exploring it, because there's so much rich data there to discover. Now we're going to open the floor up for a time of question and answer, just a few minutes. I have a few questions already, but I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question that arose or a comment that arose during while you listen to Professor Boll, you can go down to the bottom of your screen and there's a Q&A button and you can send me a question. We already have a few in the hopper, but I just want to remind you all to do that if you have something to ask. We do have a few simple ones I want to ask from Nelson Jennings. First off, have any other languages been considered for the CBDB? For example, other East Asian languages like Japanese or Korean? Oh, you're muted. It's all right.
CBDB can contain any language in the Unicode. Mm-hmm. So yes, what we've found is we've basically given our architecture to Japan. And so there are people working on a Japanese biographical database, some people on Korean. these can be linked together. We do in fact have Japanese, Korean, and European American figures in the CBDB database. Ricci being one example,
Right.
And Japanese as well. But we haven't tried to explore those other countries ourselves, but people are doing it.
Great. Wonderful. I have a question too, especially as I was listening to it, especially on the API front. Now, this might be a more technical question than what most people are interested in, but what's the cost like on maintaining APIs, both in terms of infrastructure and staff? Because I know, things have to be reiterated over time, or you have to have server hosting space. What was it like to establish those APIs,
Okay.
and how do you see people using them, and the costs associated with that?
So CBDB is an ongoing project, and will be ongoing for decades to come. So one of the reasons for commercialization is to create income, to maintain our staff. We have one full-time person and editorial groups and things like this of part-timers. The API is very simple. You can go to the CBDB database and CHJS database, and from the website, you can get the API and just install it. There's no problems in maintaining it. Yes, the database does change, and the structure changes, and the APIs are updated accordingly. It's just a few lines of code. It's very simple.
Okay, good to know. We have another one coming in. I was wondering if I think we have a question from Stephen Hu. Just maybe could you speak a bit more about the database as the data is downloadable? How does the visualization of the data work? I think you touched on it a bit in your as you were speaking, but how does one kind of use the data to actually create
Visualizations.
the visualizations that you were showing us?
Yeah. So you'll notice that on on the CBDB query pages, there is an export function. This is export to GIS, or sometimes it says export to GIS or export to social network analysis. And it will give you choices about what coding, UTF or GBK, the national standard in mainland China. It will give you choices of different social network analysis programs, depending on what you have. All you do is click that and save the output, and then open it in your social network analysis program like GEFI or ArcGIS or QGIS for geographical data. Zhongwen Zaixian, the Yinda system, is planned to offering visualizations online. So you could call up somebody's social network and see it on a map as well. That will be possible online. But at the moment, we export to those other programs, both of which are free. QGIS is free, works on Macs and PCs, and GEFI is free as well, works on Macs and PCs.
Yeah, thank you. That it is a little bit of a learning curve, some of these technical programs, but as Professor Boll has said, it's very easy to export the data into the sort of formats you need. And there's a lot of tutorials online if you're interested in creating these sort of visualizations. Just get in there and start exploring. We have one final question, again about the relational traits of the CBD. Could you talk a bit more about how those relationships work and what people can do, kind of in understanding the complex, interconnected nature of the data?
Okay, so I did not show a series of slides explaining what a relational database is exactly. You can get that from the CBDB website. If you go to supporting documents, you can find explanations, and both written and slide decks showing things like the nature of relational databases and explaining that. But in essence, what it says is, on a spreadsheet, let us suppose you have somebody who has a career, and during that career, they pass examinations and they hold 10 different offices. On a spreadsheet, you might list the person's name, the years, and the office held and the place held. In a relational database, you would name the person only once. You would give them an ID number. You'd name an office only once and give it an ID number, a place only once and give it an ID number, right? And so what you're really doing is saying this ID number connects to this ID number of office of this place. And so you have different tables. You have a table of people, a table of offices, a table of places. And because you can connect these things together, I can also ask the question, give me this, if I have this place, tell me everybody with a connection to this place. The tables are interconnected, but that's based on coding and ID numbers, right? And the great challenge in creating a biographical database, particularly when you get to the kinds of numbers we have, is to make sure that everybody has unique ID number, each person in the database, but also as new data comes in, to figure out who is the same person. Because I'll give you an example. During the Ming Dynasty, there's a name Wang Zuo, which means an aide to the king, literally. Well, there are 30 people who have that name. And unless you have enough data points, you can't be sure if they are 30 different people or 15 different people or 10 different people. So disambiguation is one of the major concerns of any biographical database. It will also be a concern for the Christian database as well.
Yes, could not speak more truly. Thank you so much, Professor Bull. This has been such an enlightening time. If you have not gone on and looked at these tools, please go online, look them up now, and begin to explore them. They are wonderful. We're going to turn now to our next panelist, Ruth Mostern. Professor Mostern is the director for the Center of World History at the University of Pittsburgh. And today she's going to be sharing about her own work on developing and launching the World Historical Gazetteer. So welcome, Professor Mostern. The virtual floor is yours.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I want to thank Alex for the introduction, and to Daryl Ireland and the rest of the Boston University group for organizing this wonderful conference and inviting me to participate. So I'm going to share my screen now and talk to you about the World Historical Gazetteer, and also about gazetteers in general as a genre. So the World Historical Gazetteer is a project of global scope. It's not specifically a project about Chinese history, and it has been funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and has been under development for the last 3 years. It went live over the summer. I wanted to talk first, before I talk about the details of the World Historical Gazetteer, I wanted to talk about gazetteers as a genre, because it's not a word that is sort of as prevalent as I think it ought to be, and in terms of the development of large scale digital humanities projects like the one that you all are organizing. Gazetteers are a simple word, are a simple concept. They're indexes of place names. So your list, your data about Christian missions, Christian schools, etc., is essentially a set of information about place names. It's a gazetteer. The China Historical GIS is information about named places in the Chinese historical administrative system, and it's a kind of gazetteer. And gazetteers are amazing resources in their own right. You can do the kinds of queries about specific locations, their relationships to one another, their distribution on maps, and so on. And in addition, they're also core infrastructure for the semantic web. That is, they permit information about specific places to be linked and shared, and they permit other kinds of information, such as the biographical information that Peter Boll was talking about, to also be associated with places as a common reference. And for example, anytime you search Google Maps looking for a restaurant or looking for a gas station, essentially what you're doing is searching a gazetteer. And this is a really important point to make, because when we think about the spatial humanities, we think about maps, we think about map visualization, but a map is simply a visual representation of other kind of information located in the form of a database. And if that information located in the form of a database is about place names, we think of it as a gazetteer. And so the people associated with places, the kinds of activities that happened at places, historical events at places, that is all information that can be organized with reference to gazetteers. And I just have up here on this slide a co-edited book that I was one of the co-editors for, that came out a few years ago, if you're interested in thinking more about gazetteers as a genre. So why am I stressing the utility of starting with gazetteers rather than starting with maps? And the answer is that for the historian's world of text, people tend not to think about sort of abstracted geospatial Cartesian kind of space, right? The sources we read named locations. People's biographies are associated with named point locations. The version of the world, and here on this slide, I'm name checking a wonderful article by a geographer named Michael Curry, Towards a World Without Maps. And this map that I'm showing on the right-hand side of the slide makes the point, and a lot of the article is about postal routes, that postal workers don't start with maps of their routes. They start with a list of addresses, and the maps of their routes are something that happens sort of retrospectively as they travel the world from address to address. It's a world, right, that Curry's article refers to as a world of topos, right? Individual named places linked together into relationships. A table of names is a world of choros, and a world of places linked to other places is a world of topos, right? This world of geos, these mathematically oriented maps of continuous space, were widespread in the sort of the vernacular world, the everyday world that we occupy, only for a really short time period. And in the computer age, in a way, we're back to the world of choros and topos once again. And so the fact that spatial humanists start by thinking that their aim is to create a map, I think leads a lot of kinds of projects astray. It makes a lot of sense, I think, alternatively, to start with creating lists and databases and models of names, and then thinking about how those names are related to one another. And of course, ultimately, if you have latitudes and longitudes, that can involve visualization. You can make a map, but the map in itself is not the goal. So one of the challenges with historical names is, of course, not just that they exist and that there are a lot of them, but that they change over time. And a couple of examples here. One is from the USGS, and it's about one place in Washington state. The other one is from UDG-Sheng, a 13th century, early 13th century geographical encyclopedia. And what each of these historical documents is doing is telling us about the variant names that exist at a given place and the way that those names have evolved over time, some relationships between names and other names. And so this means that a historical gazetteer isn't just a list, a sort of version of a database of names, but a database that models how those names are related to each other and how they change over time. And so a world map of a historical gazetteer actually schematically looks something like this, right? It's not just names on a map, but it's a relationship between those names on the map and the way that they've changed over time. So these are the principles. Actually, I have a couple more slides on that topic. Beijing is one good example. This is on the left-hand side of this slide is all of the historical names of Beijing according to the Wikipedia entry on that topic. And on the right-hand side, one particular iconic map. Many of you may know this map, the 1584 Ortelius map, which marks Beijing as Civitas C. Paquin is how Beijing is represented on this map. And so ideally, a gazetteer relates all of these names to one another. And this is not, going back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, right? This is really important for a work of reference. Somebody who sees the information about Civitas Pekin needs to know that that should draw up for them all the other information they may have about Beijing. And it's also interesting and important just simply for understanding the history of political power, to the extent that the power to name places is one of the important ways that political power is manifested. So to turn to the World Historical Gazetteer, the idea is to build a global resource that instantiates some of the principles that I was talking about. One characteristic of going sort of all the way global and all the way throughout history with a gazetteer is that the example I was just showing of Beijing is an example that often the kind of expertise that it takes to make a gazetteer is very specific to one time period and one region. And so a global gazetteer can't be the project of one research team. It has to be a project to build core infrastructure and core data to which these kinds of specialist projects can be associated using linked open data principles. And this is what the World Historical Gazetteer has set out to do. So it's an index of place data drawn from historical sources, contributed by specific research projects and individuals. As I said, we've been going for about 3 years, funded by the NEH. We just went live this summer, and we currently have about 1.8 million modern place names and about 60,000 temporally scoped place names. And just a couple of screenshots here. One is on the left, the coverage from a project called the Old World Trade Database by a contributor by the name of Matthew Cholek. On the right-hand side, a result of what happens when I search for Beijing in the World Historical Gazetteer. And Peter Boll was just talking about disambiguation. That's true when it comes to people's names. It's also true when it comes to place names. And so this is all of the places that have ever been known as Beijing at any time in history, according to the information in the World Historical Gazetteer. If I click on the Beijing that is the one that is the current capital of the People's Republic of China, I get a range of information. These are different contributions about Beijing, linked to different contributors and different databases, all of which then associated using linked open data with one another as representing the same entity, and information from a range of languages and links out to a range of other kinds of sources. We are also experimentally, in addition to developing the infrastructure and the content about places, we're also interested in something that we're calling traces. And traces are other kinds of phenomena associated with particular named places. And as we move forward, we envision that traces are a way of semantically linking places to one another. This is just an example of one source. This is just really simple exemplary data, but for instance, it would be possible through links of traces and to show, all of the locations associated with some particular genre of art, or all of the places associated with a particular painter over the course of his or her biography. And so this allows for that sort of topos version of places, not just as individual places, but as places linked to one another. As I already said, the World Historical Gazetteer has about 60,000 temporally scoped place records, 1.8 million modern records. We took the modern records from the Getty Thesaurus of Geographical Names, and the temporally scoped records come from a number of our contributors and from other sources, including information. We started, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, we started with about 10,000 records from the Dorling-Kindersley Atlas of World History. That's what we think of as our sort of core, our spine of global temporal information from a well-respected historian and his team. Everything else is more or less specific to particular times and regions of the world. We have 13,000 places in the early colonial Americas from the HGIS de las Indias, about 20,000 sites in the classical Mediterranean from Pleiades, the Old World Trade Routes project that I already showed some information about, Euratlas, cities in historical Europe, the Al Turaya project about early Islam, an additional historical project in the queue. And of course, it would be wonderful if the Christian database were something that we were able to accession in the future. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but that the world history, the index in the back of any atlas is a form of a gazetteer. There's a huge amount of historical spatial information sort of sitting in historical atlases, and through a process of sort of OCRing and reorganizing the data at the back of the World Historical Atlas, we were able to create a gazetteer database that was the historical core for the World Historical Gazetteer. In addition to administrative districts and polities and settlements, we also have information from a project called dplace, which is a linked open data version of the HREF, the Historical Research Area files, which are turn of the 20th century ethnonyms. We have physical geographical features, language regions. Our aim has been to lightly cover the whole world in a way that is broad but shallow, so that any particular specialist project has some point of linkage. That is, if you were to contribute, right, if any of you were to contribute your specialist data, we may not have a lot of information that you could link it to, right? We may not have 10 other versions of the settlement you're interested in, as we do for the case of a place like Beijing, but we can at least say that it's close to some ethnonyms, it's located in some biome, and it is somehow sort of tethered to the world spatially in some way. And this is an example. These are some sort of experimental visualizations that show what that looks like, that even where we may have relatively sparse coverage, we're able to locate things in the context of their watersheds, the ocean currents that they're located around, and so on. As I said, this is a linked open data project, and what that means is that we're using IDs to link projects, to link data to one another in the way that Peter Bohl was talking about within relational databases, but also across databases that may have very little in common in their organizational structure, except that they're exposing their information in the form of URIs, they're exposing IDs, and we can use those IDs to link data across data sets that are otherwise disconnected with one another. This includes place records as well as trace records, both formatted for contribution to us in the linked places format in the case of place records, and in the linked traces annotation format in the case of trace records. Registered users to the World Historical Gazetteer can upload their own place data sets. They can augment them by reconciling them against the Getty TGN or Wikidata, and hopefully coming soon against our own World Historical Gazetteer index, and then publish them and contribute them. So if you are interested in uploading data to the World Historical Gazetteer, you upload it to a Postgres database, which then makes it available to you to view it and augment it. And one of the options you have as a contributor to the World Historical Gazetteer, or someone interacting with the World Historical Gazetteer, is simply to upload your data, to reconcile it against these other sources, and then to take it away with you, right? To say that you now have this list of names that you may not have known much about, you may not even have had the coordinates associated with them, and you can now get that information and take it away. you can also from there publish it. You can accession it in the World Historical Gazetteer, in the index, which makes it visible as part of a search like the one that I showed you before for Beijing. One of the things that it means that to say that the World Historical Gazetteer is a linked open data project is that our data is organized as a SCOS concept. It's a data model for sharing knowledge organization systems as structured data. Having it structured in this way is what allows us to share it across multiple websites. And it also, I wanted to show this, I know this is not a technical talk, but also that space is, or place is, a conceptual idea. Right? To say that something is a place isn't just to say it has a name and a location, but to say that it has this kind of cluster of information around it. It has a set of types, it has a set of relationships, it may have a set of different locations. We demoed this recently and someone said, oh, this is a way of decolonizing metadata, right? This is a way of ensuring that one conceptual place can have many different languages, many different points of views, depending on who the contributor is. And then of course, that is what allows us to say that Beijing and Dadu are actually the same place, since this is conceptual information. So we're contributing, we're publishing in a union index, we're annotating trace data, we're creating a range of interfaces and an API, and all of this is the system that we're organizing. I don't really have time to talk about the details of the reconciliation process, but this is what allows you as a specialist contributor of your own data to associate it with all the other information that we have about that same place in the system from contributors who have a range of different kinds of perspectives about the same place. Coming up, we have a bunch of different specialist databases coming forward in the system, enhancing the historical information that we already have. We're going to be presenting in virtual London at the 6th annual Linked Pasts conference coming up in just a few weeks. And so if you're interested in being a part of this community of people using linked data methodologies to link together historical databases, I would invite you to join us at Linked Pasts virtually coming up next month. This is our team. I want to specially acknowledge Carl Grossner, my friend and collaborator, who's the technical director and lead developer for this project, our postdoctoral fellows at the World History Center at the University of Pittsburgh, our project consultant, and thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Mostern. This is just an amazing project, and the technicality of it is truthfully, it is so much to manage, even as we've begun our project, to see the sort of the linked data and integrate, to see your integration with other projects around the world is truly inspirational. So I want to remind everyone to, again, make sure if you have any questions for Professor Mostern, go ahead and click the Q&A button at the bottom, and you can send them to me, and I'll make sure they get asked. So I want to go ahead and ask, we do have a question actually in the hopper. So let me ask, this one comes from Christopher Decaux. How would one handle imagined places or imaginary places for the Gazetteer?
Yeah, so a Gazetteer, right, in order for a place in a Gazetteer to be mapped on the geospatial Earth, it has to have a coordinate. But any place that is named as a place and is modeled in a Gazetteer database is a place, right? And if it is fully imaginary, if it's fully fictional, that's fine. If it's something that's a sort of a conceptual, nickname, right, associated in some way with the geospatial Earth, then a methodology like this would make it possible to sort of affix one or many locations to that fictional object. And to use, something sort of less kind of abstract than fully fictional places, the number of locations in the index of that Dorling Kindersley World History Atlas is actually about 14,000, and we've been able to map 10,000 of them. There are an additional 4,000 that it would take sort of place by place research, going back and looking for them on the printed maps in the atlas itself that we were not able to find by batch query against other existing gazetteers, which is how we have sort of proceeded at volume so far. So for right now, those are sitting in our index. They're not visible on the map, but they're things that we hope to map in the future. And we also, for instance, we've just worked with a collaborator who has places from the 16th century European maps of the coast of West Africa. And that also includes some places that we know where they are relative to other places that we've located, but we don't have locations for yet. And for now, we're not excluding them. They're in our index as places that we will be able to map as we sort of build up the content sufficiently to be able to make those relationships.
Really, that's very interesting. That was not a question I would have thought of, but it is very important because there's so many, especially in the concepts of different conceptions of space and time. The geo concept really constrains the nature of how we think about places. When prior to that, places could exist even though they never might actually exist on the map. I do have a question. You didn't have time to get into the reconciliation process, but that is actually something I'm very interested in. Kind of about the human. What's the human cost behind all of these technological advances? Because that reconciliation process, at least to my ears, sounds quite intensive. But I do wonder, is it? And what's your experiences with it?
Yeah, so this is one of the tools that we've developed that I think is most exciting and most likely to be useful to the wider sort of geohumanities community. So it's essentially a process for doing computer-aided human work. So if you upload a gazetteer of, say, Christian sites in China, we run batch queries, sort of 3 sets of queries essentially, through our index and come up with what we think, right, according to that automated technique, what might be a set of possible matches for each of those places. And then that allows a human editor to sort of march through one by one and kind of click through them. And for each one, say, this place that you think is the same place as the one that I contributed, I agree, it is the same place. This other one, I know that it's in the same region, but it's not exactly the same place. Maybe it's a sort of related place or a match of some kind, but it's not identical. This other place has nothing to do with it. Remove that from the list. And that is what then allows us to establish these sort of linked data relationships between those places. So it's work, but it's so much less work than doing it by hand. And it's more accurate than just saying, okay, we've run an automated query and we're done. And it's something we've had undergraduate students do reconciliation tasks for some of our contributed data sets, not necessarily with a ton of subject matter expertise, but just being able to sort of look at relationships between names, where things are located relative to one another on the map, and make human judgments. And they're able to do that, depending on the data, at a sort of a rate of, let's say dozens an hour.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. That's very nice to hear. There's so much human. I think what technology can sometimes give us the impression that things are just automatic or techno magic, when there is a lot of human power behind this. So that's really helpful to hear. I have one more question. We have a couple more minutes. One of the slides mentioned beginning with an author edited source rather than kind of opening up this kind of interconnected source full of contributors from the beginning. can you say more about that, and also what's ongoing? Are you now at the stage where it's really just waiting for more contributors, or are there also author-edited sources that you're working through as a project team on the side?
Yeah, so we wanted to start, I've had experiences with other sort of infrastructural scale digital humanities projects in the past that have taken a build it and they will come approach, right? Something I've taken to calling the sort of the empty library approach, right? Where you build a building, you build some shelves, you announce to the world that you have a library and that people should contribute books because it's a great resource. And I think those kinds of projects have not generally, I mean, as we have the hindsight of a couple of decades in the infrastructural scale digital humanities, those kinds of projects have not tended to be very successful, right? They don't have a lot to offer to potential members of the community. And so we wanted to start not only with information from, the contemporary big gazetteers, GeoNames, Getty, Wikipedia, which is the linked data version of Wikidata, but also to seed it with some global scale data that we thought would be interesting and useful to historians, and that also as historians, we could say that this came from a peer-reviewed and authored source. And that seemed important, partly for populating the map, and also just for ensuring that this is a project that's associated with the historical community. It's not just, something that's kind of out there in the world that doesn't have a sort of an authorship or a scholarly genealogy associated with it. Right. So that's why we started not only with the big gazetteers, which at one level from an infrastructural point of view, that would have been sufficient, but it was important to us as a project by and for historians and historical scholars and the interdisciplinary historical scholars to start with some authored sources as well. And that's why we added the Atlas of Oral History and DPlace. And so now we don't have any other non-thematic global scale projects in the queue. We have some transnational projects. We're working with a group called the Enslaved Project, which is working with African, Latin American, North American, and Atlantic world data. So that is absolutely transnational in scope. We're working with a Central Asian group that is digitizing a historical atlas of Central Asia. And then other than that, well, in addition to those, we're working with people who have thematic projects that are sort of deep dives into specific times and places, as the Chinese Christian project would be.
Wow, well, thank you so much. I mean, that this sort of linked data approach that you're taking, I really appreciate it, because it kind of gets out of the zero-sum game of scholarly academics, where instead of, we silo ourselves at times, and we, any sort of contribution to another project is somehow taking away time from our projects. But I think the approach you're taking is so refreshing, in that really, as we all contribute together, we all get richer together. And I think that is a great approach. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your time today. And we're going to move on to our final panelist today. So last but certainly not least, I want to welcome our next panelist, Dr. Heng Hu. Professor Hu is the Vice Director of the Ching History Institute at Renmin University. Today, he's going to be sharing about his work on the China Government Employee Database. So welcome, Professor Hu. The virtual floor is yours.
Okay, it's my great honor to have the opportunity to attend this workshop and have the opportunity to communicate with so many distinguished scholars. My presentation will focus on spatial logic of local governments in the Qing Dynasty based on China Government Employee Database, Qing. I have been focusing on this research work for recent 2 years. This research is also supported by Dr. Bijiachen, who is working as a postdoc at the Institute of Qing History in the Ming University. and Professor Cameron Campbell from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. As you know, the ruling mechanism of the Qing regime has given rise to a paradox. As you know, the Qing dynasty had extensive territory, and the Qing dynasty also entered an important period of China's population growth, from 100 million in the early Qing to 400 million in the Qianlong period. However, the Qing regime strictly restrained its formal system of bureaucracy. The picture on the right is a census of the statistic table of officials in the Qing dynasty from 1851 to 1887. The total number of officials was between 30,000 and 15,000. Among them, there was only 8,000 local officials. So one important question is, how did the Qing government control the whole country by maintaining a very limited officials, despite expanding population and territory? So I think we need to look back at the Qing government itself for answers, especially from the perspective of institution. The Qing regime established its centralized system of the categorization of local government and administrative units called Chong, Fan, Pi, Nan during the regime of Yongzheng. All the administrative regions were ranked according to the four criteria, Chong, Fan, Pi, Nan, namely transportation, 地当孔道越冲, and massive administration, 政务分匀越繁, tax arrears, 富多补欠越疲, and crime rates, 民刁俗汉命到案多越难. And in terms of the ranking of the regions, the system of local bureaucracy could be clarified into the most significant 最要缺 if the region contains all the four criteria, significant if 3, and medium if 2, and simple position if 1 or not. The most significant and significant position were determined either by the emperor, 秦子缺, or by the governor general, called 体调缺. And the medium and simple possession was determined by the board of personnel, called 部选缺. The Chongfan Pinan system has received scholarly attention, but few on the perspective of spatial distribution, nor on the connection with facial information. The only research may be Harvard World Map has a map called China 1820, busy here. So my research aims to do analysis by means of quantitative and GIFs. I mainly use 3 main data resources. The first is Geography of Qing History, edited by Professor Zhou Yilin at Fudan University at Shanghai. It will be published soon. It records the accurate information of the Qing administrative region. The collection of up to nearly 2,000 records, including 1,517 records of counties and 345 records of prefectures. This is one example, 台北府, 淡水县. And you can see the model of data in geography of Qing history. This is the number province, prefecture, county, and this is Quefen, this is Chongfan, Pinan, and this is location. The second one is Jinsenlu. Jinsenlu offers great convenience for the study of Chinese officialdom and Chinese society during the Qing. From 1644 to 1911, the Qing government and private publishers published Jinsenlu every 3 months, which record the name and the particulars of all civil officials, and sometimes the military officials too. This collection contains 4 billion to 5 billion records of government officials, so it's a very big number. You can see the model of Jinsenlu like this. This is a region, and this is population and tax, and this is a projection, and this is the name, and this is the degree qualification, and this is the date of appointment and the appointment type. Recently, a new database entitled China Government Employee Database Ching has been established by a research group led by Professor James Lee and Professor Cameron Campbell in Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. I have joined this collaboration project to analyze the database and the related topics. And the database like this. If you want to know more about the database, there is an introductory article Professor Peter Ball has mentioned in his presentation. The article was written by Bi Jiacheng, Cameron Campbell, Yu Xueren, and James Lee. It called Big Data for the Study of Qing Officialdom, the China Government Employee Database, Qing, published on the Journal of Chinese History in July 2020. As of July 2020, CGEDQ has contained more than 4 million records. It contains more than 30,000 officials between 1760 and 1912. CGEDQ covering the period from 1900 to 1912, along with documentation, has been accessible online on Hong Kong University of Science and Technology database, and also on a mirror sheet at the Institute of Qing History at the Ming University of China. So if you want to know more about the project and find the download link, you can also search CGEDQ on Google. And the first website is this. A number of research articles on the base of the new database have been published in Chinese History and the Social Science Journal, as well as in the International Journal. And this is some articles. Some were written by Cameron, and some written was by me, and some was by we collaborate with each other. And in 28 and 29, 2 workshops were held in the Ming University of China. One was Jinsenlu database and the Qing History Research Workshop, and the other was textual and quantitative research of Jinsenlu workshop. In addition, China Government Employee Database Qing Postgraduate Workshop was also held in Wuhan last year. It's 3 workshops. And the 3 data resource, we also used CHGS for geographical analysis. Based on this research, a number of findings have been made. I will introduce 3 aspects here. The first finding is that who decided the appointment of officials? The authorities who had the power to appoint for prefectures was the Emperor Qing Zique. You can see on the map, the brown area is Qing Zique. And the board of personnel, 部选区, the black area, or the governor general, 提调区, the yellow area. And appointment by the emperor account for 48.3% of prefectures. These were in the most important regions of the country. You can see on the map. This is both the most important areas in China. Appointment by the Governor General account for 26.1% of prefectures. At the beginning, they mainly in the region where the Miao resided, including Yunnan, Sichuan, Guizhou, and Hunan province. And later, some prefectures provincial boundaries was also included, and you can see this map: Shanxi, Zili, Henan, Shandong, and Jiangsu. And in the later Qing, the prefectures in all the newly created province was appointed by the Governor General. You can see in this map, Xinjiang and the northeast of China. And the third is appointment by the board of personnel account for 25.6% of prefectures. And they were concentrated in areas close to the boundary of inland province. And we can see both of them was located in inland province. However, there were exceptions and problems like neglect of the change of prefecture and clarification in coastal boundaries area, qualification, immutability. You can see in south of Guangdong and in Zhejiang, the Fujian, there are many simple medial possession that is not good for the defense of the West. And is at the country level, compared with the prefecture, it is different. Appointment by the Governor General account for 33%, and appointment by the board of council account for 67%. Is quite different from the prefectures. The second finding is the preferential treatment in the frontier. The Qing government intentionally promote the level of the frontier regions in order to attract officials with better administrative capabilities to assume the post there. Most of the exception was related to the assignment of Miaojiangque, which is mostly located in Sichuan, Guizhou, Yunnan, and Hunan province, and some was Yanhe区 or 边区 border code, and some was Haijiang区along the coast. You can see in the map. The most significant administrative area in the border area are obviously higher than those in the inland province. The first is Fengtian, second is Heilongjiang, the third is Jilin, and the fourth is Xinjiang. They are both in the border area. The third finding is the promotion of local officials. The ranking system influences the selection and promotion of local officials in the long run, based on CGDQ using data to establish links between records and to produce tabulations. As to the country officials, if you are in the most significant position, you have a 80% chance of being promoted to a higher position. If you are in the significant position, you have only 15.8% chance. If the position is medium or simple, the chance of promotion are less than 10%. And if we see the prefectures that we can know 61.9% of prefectures were transferred from post in the central government. Only 35.8% was promoted from post in local governments. No doubt, it has a negative effect on the motivate of county officials. And the perspective of promotion for prefectures was generally higher. 21% average would reach a higher office. For prefectures who served in prefectures categorized as most significant 最要缺 and significant 要缺, the chance of promotion was between 23.5 to 26.3%. Those who were prefectures in province capitals have even higher chance of being promoted, 40.5%. So it can be seen that how the Qing dynasty used geographical information to allocate limited bureaucratic resource according to the difficulty of governments, and how the Qing dynasty deliberately promote the level of the frontier region to attract officials with better administrative capability to go to the post and the unified system. It is further explored how political distinctions affect the region selection and promotion officials. This study aims to provide a long-term perspective for understanding the selection system of contemporary Chinese officials. As we know, there have been breakthrough achievements in the building of historical databases for the history in China, especially in the Qing dynasty. The establishment of Qing history database and the subsequent codification of historical research has overcome the lack of systematic statistical data in traditional historical research and other serious deficiencies in statistic research. This database has greatly improved the opportunity for using quantitative method, but there are also new issues in the use and understanding of historical materials. That's my presentation, and thanks very much.
Professor Hu, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting to see how you're able to kind of march through the data and to see some very, very interesting findings about the nature of administration and regions. So interesting. So first, actually, we have one of our other panelists, Professor Bo, would like to ask you a question. So I'm going to give the floor to him.
Thank you very much, Professor Hu. That was really interesting. This is the best data we ever had for understanding the appointment system in the later imperial bureaucracy. And the amount of work that Renmin and others have done to create this is really extraordinary. I just note that all this, the data on appointments will appear eventually in the China Biographical database as well. And that the China W data sets that G. William Skinner created include, for 1820 and 1893, include the classification of counties and prefectures into Nan, Pi, Chong, and so on that you mentioned, the 4 different classifications. My question is this: I did not know that the Board of Personnel was appointing so many prefects, and governors were appointing others, and the emperor was appointing others. But why was the Board of Personnel appointing the prefects on the borders of provinces? Because you said they appointed them on the borders of provinces. Why was that?
I think the border province is more difficult than the inland province. So if you want to choose a property officials, you must know about the person. And the emperor and other government in Beijing, they don't know. They just know how there's exams, how there's scores. So they must post some positions to the governor general, and they know more about the person because they was worked under under the province. They have more opportunity to know each other. So I think maybe that's the reason why in the border province there are more possession was determined by the governor general.
So the implication is that the border areas are more difficult.
Yeah.
Why?
I think it maybe have some reasons. One is there are not only Han lived there, but also have many other peoples. They have different culture. So it may be very difficult to connect with other persons. And the second reason may be the geography. When inland province, most county, you can go to there in a very short time. But if it was a bound province, you have to spend a lot of time to get there. So I think maybe it's a main reason.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Professor Bull. And that's very intriguing. It spurs lots more questions in my mind. But there's another one that I'd like to ask. You know, it's very rare, I find, when we talk about history, when we have historical presentations, that you get so many charts and graphs, and the statistical approach to history in some ways I feel like it's a growing, and especially these digital projects facilitate that. For example, you mentioned if you were in one region, you would have a 80% chance of promotion to a higher rank. I mean, that sort of data is really hard to come by in other sort of historical questions. And so I wonder if you could just speak more broadly about the nature of integrating statistical approaches to history. You know, what can it do and what can't it do? And I think Professor Bull's question just touched a bit on that, but just if you could speak more to it.
Yeah, I think the Chinese government employee database was a very good database for history research. It contains all the civil officials in the Qing dynasty. Some was working in Beijing, and some was very low-level officials. So the database was covered nearly all the civil officials. and we can use it to do some qualification method, and we can use state GIS to analysis all the dates. And we can also use a new database to connect with CBDB and the CHGS and other databases. So I think maybe all the Qing history will benefit from the new databases.
Yeah.
It's just the beginning.
Yeah, I think so. As your presentation showed, there's so much there that is to be mined, and so many more questions that it can help us ask. So thank you so much for your presentation today and time. And I'm
Thank you very
sadly
much.
gonna, yeah, thank you. I'm sadly gonna have to cut our discussion off here because we are running out of time. But I just want to say one more time to say thank you to all of our presenters. It's really been an interesting and enlightening time. And for anyone who's still, we have plenty of attendees still on. We have one final session for today. We're going to come back together into the common room and hear a bit more what was presented in the other presentation and open up the floor for broader discussion. So all you have to do is stay here for 2 more minutes, and then one of my other colleagues, Professor Minigon's, will be picking up and leading us through that session. So thank you all, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Welcome everybody back. So let's just wait for a minute or so that to see that everybody gets in. So we have around 30 minutes to conclude our works in this common session. We will have the following format. At the beginning, our 2 rapporteurs for session 1, Professor Frederic Fermonte, and for session 2, Dr. Wang Wenlu will be giving a quick summary of what they have heard, and we're very grateful to them for what is a difficult job to do in just 4 minutes each, so that people who were in different sessions can have an idea of what was going on in the other one. And then we will open up for discussion. And I would like to remind everybody that while we are, of course, interested in learning about the project we have heard from our experts, today we really want to position the China Historical Christian Database to succeed. And so what can we learn from the experiences we have heard from others of already established platforms for the CHCD going forward? And how can the combined expertise that is represented in the panel and you, the audience, help us build a tool that can be transformative for the work of scholars, students, and the public in our subfield? So without further ado, let me let Professor Fermonte start with a little summary then of his session. Frederic, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Professor Minigon.
Show your face as well.
Absolutely.
There you
this
go.
Is me.
Yeah.
Straight from California.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. It has been fascinating to listen to Peter Ball, Ruth Master, and Hung Hu explain how these databases were built and how they were conceptually given shape initially. And then equally fascinating, it's been to see how they have been developed over time, because databases seem to be entities in some more than one way, similar to organic living organisms that change, not just in content, but also in structure, as Peter Ball pointed out, and that as such need constant updates and care. The trap of disambiguation was mentioned by two of our presenters as an important pitfall to watch out for. Another commonality that I sort of could spot in the presentations is the need to connect, not just within the database, but between databases. So there's a desire to engage and represent more than one type of user or researcher, and from multiple fields in a truly interdisciplinary kind of way. Peter Ball mentioned that they're working on or looking towards connecting the two databases he presented on, and Ruth Mustern explained in detail the 6 or 7 large building blocks, the data sets such as Jeremy Black's DK Atlas of World History. And she's explained how the World Historical Gazetteer has sought to create a truly global, a broad but shallow framework of connections. And it seems like databases in particular are the work of scholarly contributions. Researchers are invited to upload their own data as registered users. And these databases are as such a call to avoid siloing ourselves. Perhaps this is an interesting change of attitudes for academics, but maybe this never should have been an encouraged attitude in the first place. So it is with excitement that we should look toward building deeper connections, I think, collaborations that perhaps transform an individual database from a broad to shallow network to a broad but in-depth system of databases. So it's exciting to ponder how scholars with a focus on Qing dynastic administrative strategies as it applies to the appointments of officials in border areas will start a conversation with scholars with a focus on that same topic, but in the Ottoman Empire, which was one of the building blocks of the World Historical Gazetteer. I think that would be an example of a broad and deep collaboration that makes me very excited as a global historian. So perhaps without further ado, I then want to open up and solicit ways from everyone present, ways in which the China Historical Christian Database can start connecting right now and in the next 18 months. How do we contribute to these deep collaborations?
Thank you very much for the presentation. And now it's the turn of Wenlu to summarize session 2.
Hello, everybody. My name is Wenlu. I'm now working at the University of Tokyo, and so I'm joined today from Tokyo, and it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. So I will be brief. In our session, we heard 3 presentations introducing 3 very important bibliographical databases, namely Chinese Christian Bibliographical Database and Chinese Christian Text Database, and Ritchie Institute's 21st Century Roundtable, and its online catalog. I think there are 3 main themes that all the 3 presentations discussed, and which is also very close related to theme of today's workshop. The first one is collaboration. So like collaboration, how do we collaborate with like say students? How do we collaborate with the graduate students enrolled in the program? And how do we collaborate with institutions, publishers? For example, the Chinese Christian Bibliography Database was closely worked with a prestigious publisher in China. And a second theme, I think, that we also shared is sustainability. Like also Frederick was mentioned in session 1, also talked about this in depth. For sustainability, there are 2 topics I think we covered in our session. The one is when we migrate data or like update software system, how do we adapt to this change of environment? And another dimension is that in terms of sustainability is how to ensure manpower, including experts of digital humanities area. And the third keyword I would propose is connection. Frederick also mentioned it just now. And connection in two ways. The first one is how do we share our raw data? Like in our session, Mr. Makamiya from Ritchie Institute said that the Ritchie Institute will be generously sharing raw data on the biographical, the missionary's biography with the CHCD. And another dimension of connection is how do we link data? How do we combine, like link all these databases? And another, there's something mentioned is how do we use softwares like ODIS and a system to combine and to create links among various databases. And I think that's the main topics and main themes that we've covered in our session. And I will use my privilege to ask a question, but maybe this question is more directed to the panelists in our session. And as you know, the CHCD is the one that now is under designing, under constructing, is a database which has a very strong geographical and relational aspect. And I was wondering, like from your point of view, that you have designed and managed a database which with a very strong bibliographic like emphasis. How do you envision that this CHCD, these kind of database can be complementary, can be used and can be can contribute to some aspect that the current database haven't already achieved? And that's all from me. Thank you. And that's 4 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I also posted some information on our two very generous rapporteurs, so you can follow a little bit what they're doing in their own research. So Frederick ended his presentation with a little question about what are the issues in uploading your own data as a registered users. And I think that maybe Peter Ball signaled that he wanted to engage with this. If you want to go ahead.
Yeah. So I think one of the first things that we should do is we should, in order to take advantage of each other's databases, is to provide the unique identifiers of people. So for example, if I know the unique identifiers of people in your database, then I can include that data in my database, but always with a link to your database. But for that, I need to have your unique identifier. And similarly, if you have unique identifiers from my database, your database can always call up information from my database. And for that, we simply use an API. Now, I don't know if the Christian database has APIs yet, but I'm sure that people that are involved with the database on the technical side can write them, and they can simply download the databases from the APIs from the China Biographical Database and CHGIS. But knowing the unique identifiers of people and places and book titles and things like this means that we can make our databases interactive and we can use each other's information. And in that way, each one of us benefits.
Thank you very much. Any others would like to respond to the general questions asked by our rapporteur? If not, there is a question from Evan Taylor, In Professor Xiao's talk in session 2, we mentioned that they created a handbook for data entry. This could touch on one of the persisting issues that Mark Meir also mentioned, authority names changing over time. Do other databases have this type of handbook? Does the CHCD have an idea for how we would like to approach this? So maybe some of you who have already elaborate databases, do you have a handbook that you share for data entry? For authority, for things like that? Mark, for example?
We don't specifically. I mean, technically we could use the Library of Congress for authority file, but the problem is that's very, US centric, and their support for non-North American names and and headings is not that good. I'm thinking, for example, of the Colombel book that I showed. For somebody who's not familiar with how the French postal system describes provinces, for example, they might be quite lost as to what words were being represented there. Or even names like Matteo Ricci. It's only been recently that Matteo Ricci, it used to be, I think, Matthew Ricci, back in the 50s and 60s. And these seem like trivial problems until you start to, how do you make a biography of somebody? It's not an easy question. And this doesn't just apply to biographies. It applies to institutions, to political borders and geographies. It's quite a widespread problem.
Peter, do you guys have a handbook?
Mute. Yes, we do have a handbook. It's called the CBDB User's Guide, and it's available from the CBDB website. You can download it. It also explains the nature of the database. We are just now introducing crowdsourcing. The problem with crowdsourcing, it's very important because there are thousands and thousands of researchers on Chinese history in China, and only hundreds in the United States. So, or in the West, generally. So we do want to open this up. However, the problem with crowdsourcing is that the contributions need to be checked. And so we've developed a mechanism that allows volunteer data to go to a board of editors for affirmation or for checking. Right? And usually we think the methods of checking are fairly simple because we've focused the areas of contribution. But crowdsourcing is a difficult procedure, no question about it.
Yeah, and we are considering, of course, that issue as well, and creating, for example, an input interface and then a handbook, training people. We have started doing that a little bit on a small scale. For example, one of our undergraduate students who might be here today, Liang Shuangyu, has been training, is from BU, some of the master students of Professor Liu Xian at Renmin at the beginning, telling, what were the issues that he encountered and so on. So, but we need to really have something in writing. And so handbooks like yours, the one of Professor Xiao, I don't know if Professor Xiao, is your handbook also available? Can we see it online, or can you share it with us? And how is it constructed?
Before Professor Xiao answers, let me just say that, Eugenio, we'd be glad to provide you with a code for our crowdsourcing system.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Just have your technical people get in touch.
Yes.
Thank you.
Professor Xiao, do you also have a handbook?
Yeah, we have a handbook or a manual. Our manual is mainly for graduate students to enter information, such as how to enter the entry according to the standard of the library, such as.
That's great. So I hope we can share that also, because it will give us the Chinese bibliographic standards as opposed to the Western one. So Mark was mentioning the Library of Congress, but it's not always good for Chinese sources. And so probably yours will help us in that respect. Professor Hu, I also wanted to ask about that. Do you have a handbook for your own project on the Ching officialdom? Professor Hu, can you hear us? Yeah.
Yeah, Professor James Lee and Camera had written a guideline of the new databases. It can download on the website.
Wonderful. So we'll also be looking into that. There is another question by Anthony Clark. In my courses on the history of Christianity in China, my students frequently write biographies of important Christians. They recommended that the CHCD provide a method for visually mapping the lives and travels of such persons. Is this being considered for the CHCD? And here I would like also my partners, maybe if they are here, Darryl and Alex, to talk about this.
Sure, I can jump in here real quick. Yeah, you know, a lot of the presentations, at least in our session, had a lot of wonderful visualizations produced by things like Stata, things like Gephi, and there's a QGIS. There's a whole suite of software that can help people visualize data. But part of the goals for our project was to lower the threshold for creating, at the very least, some easy to read and understand maps. For maps, network maps and geographical maps for people for students or for historical researchers who aren't necessarily versed in the world of digital humanities. So if you go online to the site, you can see a kind of test run of the beta version. There's a video there. We're still developing it now, working with some coders. But it really is creating visual maps of people's lives and travels is something that's quite possible already with the database. All you'd have to do is put the person's name in, and you'd get a quick map that has all the locations that we've recorded them being located at in the course of the in the course of their lives. So as long as we have data on them, then we will have points on where they were. So this would definitely be a tool that you could use in the classroom, and students can create maps, take screenshots, and use those for class projects.
Another question is more about the general context, and maybe Ruth Monster at some point can pitch in. The question is, the CHCD is based on one religion, Christianity. This is from Elena Valussi, who is an expert on Buddhism. Are you thinking of also highlighting connections with other Chinese religious traditions and how they connect to locations of Christian churches and to Christian personalities? Is this something you are thinking about for the future? We certainly want to have federations of sites. We do Christianity, others are doing Buddhism, others are doing Taoism. At some point, we'll be able to see how they interact. We go to the same place and we see, oh, there are so many Buddhist temples, so many Taoist shrines. There's two churches, how they are interacting. And so, Ruth, you are trying to do something that is a federation as well, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier in the conversation when you and Peter and others were talking about crowdsourcing and data formats and handbooks and so on. And in digital projects, I think generally there's sort of two metaphors back to the pre-digital world, the non-digital world of publishing. And one is, and basically the question, and this is, things are a little fuzzy, but the question is, are you creating a book or are you creating a library, right? And if something is a book, then that has, or a digital project that is a book-like thing, right? That has certain implications about consistency of format, what editorial functions look like, and so on. And of course, books can be single-authored books or edited books, but they're basically coherent, consistent things that have a particular relationship to peer review. And a library is, of course, a collection of books, right? And a digital project can be something more like a book, even if it's very huge, even if it's the size of, CBDB or the Christian database, or it can be something that's more like a collection of things. And if it's a collection of things, then just as objects in a physical library, right, need to have, say, a call number, right? The call number needs to exist according to a common, generally recognized format in order to allow a searcher to find their way to something. So there's absolutely still a need for some kind of coordination about that. But then once somebody finds their way to a particular book, those books may be very heterogeneous relative to one another and having in common only the fact that they share a call number. And of course, libraries can still have rules about accessioning. They can make decisions about what kinds of books they consider reliable and appropriate to put in their library, but the books themselves can be very different from each other, having in common only the fact that they share a call number. So in a sense, I know I'm speaking very abstractly, but I think there are a lot of digital projects, right? Some digital projects are very clear that they're the one thing or the other, and others are kind of somewhere in the middle in a fuzzy way. And I think it's useful in many cases to just kind of make a decision, just sort of have the idea in the back of your mind about whether what you're building is more like a book, right? In which case you need to have a great peer review structure and all of the contribution be formatted in identical or similar ways, or whether what you're doing is linking many different data sets together where the linkage occurs really in a more superficial way, right? Just at that sort of call number level of, okay, through this common system, I've found that there's sort of database A and database B, understanding that I can see a little bit about what they have in common together, but that I then need to sort of link off to some other location in order to sort of explore them in their full detail. So, so the World Historical Gazetteer is more that second kind of project, right? That one that says, you know, we have a bunch of databases with just enough in common that allows you to see them together. It allows them to be indexed together, but with the understanding that through our linked places format, you're not necessarily seeing all of the details and all of the heterogeneity that might exist in that originally authored work. You might need to go off to some other website, right? Follow some ID numbers in order to sort of find all of the details that that contributor has in mind about that place.
Wonderful. And Nicholas Standard mentioned in his presentation, Nicholas, can you hear us? That there is a platform that, for example, you would use in Belgium, Otis. Yes, and which seems to be a bibliographic correspondent to some of this umbrella, you know, kind of, it's like an Expedia.com for bibliographic records. Is that so?
I think it was very nicely explained by Ruth. So it is making this kind of linkage, and I put on my screen because that's easier. It's establishing these linkages, but what is interesting there is that you have people, bibliography, places, institutions, and so on. You have about 7 different topics that are linked together. So you search for a name, and then you will see, oh, this person was present in that institution from that year to that year, and there you have a database about that institution, you see. I do not know, let's say, all the technical details about it, but I think it's at least worthwhile exploring or taking some ideas from what they have as a kind of network of databases.
Yeah. So there are questions actually coming up in response to what Ruth and you have said. So does the CHCD see itself as a book or a library or somewhere in between? This is from Ed and Madeline Allen. And that's a great question because some others like Chris White, for example, ask, well, following up on the pedagogical dimension, will there be a space to display student work using the CHCD? So I think that these are two separate things. We have a website where these kind of things could be displayed. We have another project, the Chinese Protestant Posters project. Maybe, Darryl, you can put a link to that and people can see where you could do that. And so if you go now to our website, there you could display this kind of projects, this kind of research that is output of the database. But the database itself, which is still in beta and is not available for the public, there was a question about that. So we will open it to the public probably at the end of 2021 when we have input enough data and it is really workable. Then that will be separate. So in a way, we will have a more traditional relational database with biographical, prosopographic data and geographic data with possibility of visualization. And so it can be used not only by experts, but also by people who are not wizards or know how to use software in order to download the Excel spreadsheets and then manipulate them. But the output, the research output must be put somewhere else. So in a way, there are these two different identities, and I can see that. And one of our rapporteurs, Cheng Yanrong, asks, what would our panelists expect the most from the CHCD? For instance, what kind of information, modeling, or relations are missing in the current databases in regard to history of Christianity in China, broadly speaking? So those of you who are working on China databases, both in our subfield and more generally like Peter Bo, what do you think our database can do to fit into your work and be a complement? Anybody would like?
Yeah. Eugenio, let me suggest that all of us benefit when we can easily find data sets and layers to relate to each other. I'll give you an example. So I've been doing some work on local history, and I knew that there was a Catholic church there into the 1950s. But I didn't know until I read your work and talked to you that in fact the missionaries had arrived there in around 1600, coming out of Fujian. So that kind of information, if I can combine that with other kinds of information about, let's say, literati, and then about when missionaries appear, and then start to look for the people they influence, and look at the families they come from, all of a sudden, our data is speaking to each other, and any kind of research is improved by it. The key to that, of course, is making sure that potential users are able to find the data. That's the great
yes. Yeah, and so what would you say that what Ruth is proposing, is sort of mega umbrella databases, is the solution to connect different databases, or is better for your database to import our Excel spreadsheet and overlay it over yours, for example, and introduce those things? How do we connect?
So I think there are two things. When you have your database and it's online, right, then we will write APIs so that the two databases can speak to each other. Right? We can do that even in beta testing now. Whether we could have, and so think of this not as one centralized database, but as a federated system in which many different things talk to each other. I'll give you another example. Grace Fong at McGill has the Ming, Ching Women Writers database of 5,000 women writers, right? Predominantly from Ming and Ching. Some of those women come from Christian families. Right? So the linkage is not just to CBDB, it's also to MQWW, to your database, and so on. And so we have like a network graph, many different things connecting to each other. As long as, but behind the scenes, we have to make an effort.
Yeah.
In the scenes, we have to make an effort. Ruth can speak to this as well.
Just a second before Ruth speaks. We reached 10:30. Those who would like to continue staying, obviously we can go on for a little while more. I am enthralled by the discussion, but of course feel free to leave if you have other commitments. Please, Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just echoing what Peter said, I think this is a yes and answer rather than an either or answer, right? That, one of the tasks, I think, of being the director of an ambitious data project in the contemporary world is to identify what other synergistic things are out there that you want to connect to, and then figuring out how to connect to each one, unfortunately, is going to be a sort of a case-by-case basis, right? It's going to be a matter, right? You'll have an API and other people can connect to your API, but also that sort of case-by-case, you're going to have to figure out what other people's APIs look like. Or in a case like the World Historical Gazetteer, and of course we would enthusiastically, welcome the contribution of the Christian spatial data from China. In that case, as with so many others, it's a matter of identifying what our reconciliation and upload process is like, what our data format requires. And so for any project, right, we all have to be self-interested at some level. I mean, to identify what other projects we think it's beneficial to us to make a connection to. And so in your case, if you feel like having your content visible through the World Historical Gazetteer, and if you think that enhancing your content with the content about those places from the World Historical Gazetteer, if you think that's useful, then it's a matter of doing some work, which is not necessarily insubstantial, right? And it's a sort of a one-off task with each of the projects, each of the sort of infrastructural scale projects, that you identify it being useful for you to be connected with. And that's just, I think, part of the task of doing a project like this in the world that we inhabit, is that you make something, amazing, that meets the needs of your community, that's structured the way that's effective for you to have it structured. And then you also identify what else is out there in the universe that you sort of self-interestedly decide, you want to have more biographical information about all your people, or you want to have more information about non-Christian aspects of all of the places that you're interested in. And in each of those cases, you figure out what it takes to deal with different people's data formats, APIs, etc.
Yeah. So I have actually a question that's connected but also separate. There are several people who are talking about hacking, security, sharing of data, copyright issues. And so I wanted, and also if we have encountered resistance, for example, on issues of copyright or sharing data. Actually, we spoke with several archives to ask them to collaborate with us. And in some cases, they're being forthcoming and enthusiastic. In other cases, they said, well, we do not know how this data will be used, or it is data that belongs to a special missionary society. We need to ask permission. So there are obviously issues there, but there is also an issue of the sensitivity of the topic. Christianity in China, religion in China in general is a sensitive topic. And so some, especially these days, there is religious campaigns going on in China all the time. Christianity, Protestant churches, Catholic churches, and so on are under pressure. So it's understandable that there is a little bit of resistance on Christian side of missionary societies and so on. I wanted to ask, for example, Professor Hu, in terms of infrastructures like your own database on Qing Dynasty officialdom, and being an international cooperative kind of enterprise with Hong Kong and others, how does the experience of being an academic within China works for you in terms of sharing data across platforms? One very simple thing, sometimes we have difficulty even having a Google Doc in common because, of course, Google cannot be used in China. VPN might be an issue. Professor Hu, do you have these kind of issues when you are communicating with scholars outside of China?
Yeah, we have established the close collaborative with Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. I think in the past 3 or 4 years, everything goes well. We collaborate with each other, and all the two research teams analysis database, and we will write the articles together. So I think everything goes well. And now we want to establish a relationship with a research institution in Germany. So I think now it seems that everything goes well. And you say we can't use Google in China, but we have our method to use it.
Okay, okay. How do you deal with the security issues, safety, hacking, other problems? Do you have concern about that?
Yeah, I think the historical database have not so sensitive. It's not about the politics of now. So until now, we don't face that things.
Yeah. Okay. So, Ruth, you have had also a lot of collaborations with the Chinese institutions. Did you find that this was an issue at all?
You know, this hasn't really come up in my particular case. For the World Historical Gazetteer, we are using up until now, what we've been working with is published, publicly available data. We're working on linking to the China Historical GIS, but of course, that's already an existing published public data set. So that hasn't been an issue for the World Historical Gazetteer. And then in my personal research, which is my Chinese facing research, I've also started with existing public data or with data owned by kind of smaller data sets owned by individuals rather than sort of institutional scale data that gets into these questions of permissions.
Okay, thank you. I think this was answered a little bit before by Alex. There was a question from Professor Xiao about the changing of names in history. Alex, I don't recall now. Did you already talked about this before? You're muted.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily talk about it, but Professor Boll mentioned some things that would definitely kind of take care of that to a degree. But yeah, the nature of the database and the wonderful part about it is that you can record a lot of alternate names for places, which allow you to kind of have a control kind of authority group without actually, to make it a little easier and simpler. Ruth Malstern, her work as well has done a lot with this in terms of obviously tracking alternate place names. But it's not a huge technical hurdle. And truthfully, it'll be, those alternate place names will be able to be searched in the database. So.
There's also a question about, is it a book or is it a library, right? Kind of question. Stephen Pieragastini asked, is the CHCD planning to store data like images, text in the cloud or an in-house server? And would this affect the ability to interact with other databases and crowdsourcing? Again, Alex, maybe you can address that.
Yeah, these are the questions that hopefully maybe if we come back to a Saturday, would be a great time to really talk about these more. But these sort of technical questions, the best practices for digital projects are something we really hope to spend more time there. Currently, I think our plan is probably to house this on an in-house server, but that could change, and especially depending on funding structures and depending on what we decide as a project team and with our board is best use case scenario. So It's a great question. So we'll keep that definitely on our mind as we kind of move this project from proof of concept to full scale.
There is a question that is more about ideology, I would say. The database provides a way of decolonizing knowledge, as Professor Mostern mentioned before, also echoing from Professor Ball's examples. My question is, how does the database develop case-based content to inspire deep connection on one subject in the academic discourse? This is from Yandai. So I think here you're talking about case studies. So in the next day of discussion, we will actually have several scholars presenting case studies where they will go into depth about particular network, particular individuals, particular moments in the history of Christianity in China. And of course, the database itself cannot do that. The database is a tool that will have the information in order to conduct that research. And of course, as Nicholas Stender said, inputting precise information as close as possible to the archival source is important, because if the information is faulty, obviously also the research will be faulty. But in the end, we have to rely on individual scholars who will be doing case studies, using the data, contributing the data. And we hope actually that among the people who are still listening and will repeat it several times, there are some who will volunteer to join our project. We are applying for grants. We hope to have funding going forward, but crowdsourcing, as Peter Ball mentioned before, is also a great way these days to really do this kind of jobs. We do not have all the knowledge that is needed, and labor and manpower is very important. Mark Meir mentioned that one of the obstacles they had at the USF is that he was, for the most part, the labor to do this, and it was not enough. So you really have to think, how do we sustain this? Crowdsourcing might be a good way to solve this. And so to reply to that, yes, we need to decolonize the knowledge by having more and more Chinese scholars who use Chinese sources and Chinese points of view. At the same time, we also do not need to throw away the baby with the water, as we say in English, in the sense that we also have to be careful that a lot of the materials produced by the missionaries has its own value and must be understood within its own context. And that's what we are trying to do, to balance and offer sources from different points of view, Chinese Christians, lay leaders, as well as foreigners who were in China. Let me see if there are any other questions that I see here. And actually, you know, if those who have the power of voice right now want to say something, for example, Frederick or Wen Lu or others who want to intervene and say anything, please do go ahead. I think I've covered more or less the questions, but I might be missing something. There was the issue of security maybe, and that Dana Robert was asking, hacking and those kind of problems. And Professor Hu seems to say, this doesn't seem to be a big issue for historical materials. Do you think, Alex, that that is the case? Are you still with us? Yes.
Yes, I'm still here. I think security issues are always, you know, a concern. You should keep them, you know, in your mind. But there are redundancies and ways you can protect your data by keeping it offline and keeping version histories. There's a lot in the tech that we can learn from the tech industry here. Thankfully, historical projects are not exactly a lucrative field for hackers, so we probably don't have to worry too much about that. But you should always be safe and try to do best practices when available, and not cost prohibitive. So I think it's definitely something we should keep talking about and keep in our mind, especially as we scale the project up into its final form. So great question.
Yeah. And Frederick, you had a question, a general question, which was forward-looking, right? Are you still with us? Yeah. Oh, there is more of you.
Yes.
Hi, Fred.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. My children are waking up slowly. Indeed, I had a more general question.
That's okay. She can stay in.
And I
Go
think Peter Boll provided a very precise answer, and then other scholars sort of picked up on that. Again, it was indeed sort of the broad and deep collaborations, and I took notes on everybody's answers continually.
Yeah, you were asking, you know, what are the ways in which the China Historical Christian Database can start connecting right now and in the next 18 months? I think we will probably talk more about that in the final concluding roundtable on Saturday. I think we are up for time. We went over time, but thank you for the 80 people who stayed with us up to now. I would like to remind everybody that we are going to meet tomorrow at 8:30 US Eastern Standard Time. And you have the Zoom guide with the link. So please use that link. And I look forward, all my other collaborators, to meeting you again tomorrow for session 3 and 4, and more case studies, voices from the archives and the libraries and from scholars on specific collections, specific moments in the history of Christianity in China. Unless you, Darryl, have anything else to add at this moment, I think we can close. Darryl, everything okay?
Just thank you for everyone being here, for the fantastic work from our panelists. Very grateful for that, and look forward to tomorrow. As a reminder, you will go directly to a session. We won't have an opening session tomorrow morning. You'll go right into either panel 3 or panel 4. Hope you have a wonderful night, day, or early morning. Thank you.
And remember that we are recording. So some people were asking about this. So it will be possible at a later date to request a link. And after we edit the recordings, we'll also save all the questions that have been asked, and we will compile them. We haven't been able maybe to answer all of them, but we will keep them also for the final roundtable. So you're really welcome, actually, as individual audience to join on Saturday, because Saturday will be when you can also work in small groups and really have a direct interaction. It will be a true Zoom interaction kind of situation. So see you tomorrow morning at 8:30 or whatever time it is in your place, wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye.